Welcome along to the polling station. It's 1 week to the polling in North Shropshire, and it's going to be an incredible week if the recent weeks are anything to go by. This is Johnny Ward with William Kedjanyi. And William, I guess the first question to ask you is any staff parties planned this Christmas?
No, and I'm actually really sad about it because the Star Christmas party is absolutely amazing, and you get to meet all of the colleagues over the year, and I don't get to be in the office each and every day. So I absolutely love it, and I'll be dreadfully sad not to be seeing them. But that said, we are abiding by the rules, and if there are any parties at Star, I can promise you, we will say on the record first if they happened. You will know. You can trust us.
And you can trust Ben Keith to extol the virtues of Nigel Farage if older parties are anything to go on.
I've never seen Nigel Farage at a Star Christmas party, and I will tell you that on the record. But yes, it's well known that he is a big fan of Mr. Farage. But that said, listen, I'd rather Ben Keith as my Prime Minister. He sort of already is, but he would do a far better job, I feel comfortable in saying, than Boris Johnson at the moment. Certainly, he could probably get Ward Conservative Party on side if everything I've heard and seen recently has been can be trusted, which I think it actually can.
The BBC website makes for incredible reading, very grim reading if you're Boris. And if I may, MPs earn up to 350 quid an hour for taking surveys. Scott's Tory leader, PM, must quit if he misled MPs. PM sorry for video after anger about lockdown party. COVID bereaved families fuming at number 10 party. Ron Atkins on number 10 party fallout. No 10 staff joke about party. What were Christmas party rules? Boris and Keir Johnson announced birth of a girl.
Yeah, it's pretty grim reading. If you're a Tory MP, and a lot of them are feeling the heat as well. Again, for a sort of line that the government has taken, for a strategy, if you could call it that, the government has taken. That strategy being basically refusing to tell the truth and then doubling down until something comes out which forces you to admit the wrongdoing. Although that said, they still haven't admitted that there was a party. Amazingly, as we are speaking on December, the 9th December, literally, there has been no actual admittance of a party, which even their own staff have been filmed talking about on the record. And one of which, of course, Allegra Stratton resigned over. So again, I feel like this is deja vu twice, 3 times, 4 times. It started with Barnard Castle last year. I think, we can't forget the amount of anger at that. But I feel like I feel like there's more anger with this, which is possibly due to the fact that last December,
we were in a very different place.
Yeah, I think the pandemic experience was far worse than last December than it was in the summer. That is not to belittle it at all. It's just these things tend to be worse in winter for a whole load of reasons. And on the date of that party, 489 people died in the UK. So to see that juxtaposition of people laughing and joking about it, it is totally understandable that people are shocked and outraged, and that is being reflected in the polls, and it's being reflected in the pressure felt by Boris Johnson especially, but also, I should add, the Downing Street operation, the government as a whole, from backbench MPs.
Yeah, it's also reflected in the betting. We've a load of market moves here to get through, principally in that by-election next week. It's not that long ago where I was saying I couldn't really see the Lib Dems not being backed purely, and I know that this is a constituency in which the Conservatives usually win comfortably, but it's been so bad of late, but this has gotten much worse, and the Lib Dems are into odds on.
Yeah, we're literally, we are now 4 to 5 for the Lib Dems to win North Shropshire. We're evens for the Tories. We're 50s for Labour. A bit more on that later, because some interesting stuff has come from Labour in that seat. And it's 80s bar. I mean, that's a remarkable turnaround. You could have gotten, I think it was something like 3 or 4 to 1, like just a couple of weeks ago. You could have gotten 4 to 1. I'm quite sure I've seen 9 to 2 about for the Lib Dems in North Shropshire, and the Tories were as short as 1 to 6 to hold North Shropshire. So again, it would be an absolutely seismic shock. I think we have to remember that this is not really a seat which should be in reach for any other party.
Well, they polled like 60% at the last election, didn't they?
Yeah, 62.7% for Owen Paterson at the last general election in 2019. Obviously, things have moved on a lot since, but it's a pretty dyed-in-the-wall Tory stronghold. It has been since the 80s.
Otherwise, it's a perfect storm for a shock because of the Paterson, the whole debacle that was, and everything obviously that's happened since. And God knows what's going to happen between now and Thursday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for one, is an apology even going to come before then? The government really do not like apologising or telling the truth. I'm less sure that the flats story. There's, of course, the government, or the Conservative Party, I should say, were fined by the Electoral Commission today. This was over the Downing Street flat last year, which we discussed in quite a bit of detail here. Could that come into play? I know that the Prime Minister has had a baby today, and whilst people, might be a bit suspicious about the timing, I just don't really see where it breaks the gap. Because
the timing of the baby be born.
Yeah, just
time for maximum electoral influence.
I am not a Boris baby truth, by the way, but that literally, I think, might appear basically to be the only sort of escape that he might get, in the sense that he probably won't do media or whatever for a few days whilst he might go on maternity leave or whatever. But here's the issue. You have a run of about, I'd say, a month or so where the government hasn't been able to implement any of its stated sort of ambitions in like PR terms, right? This week was meant to be Crime Week, amazingly. It started with the government going tough on drugs. Boris Johnson doing, I think it's a photo op in Liverpool, he's on the raid police officers, really trying to enforce all that stuff, which would play well with Tory voters at large and with people who tend to vote for the Tory party. And it's just been completely obliterated by this video that's been released by ITV, by these revelations, and also, actually, we have to remember, by a growing number of other get-togethers that are now being investigated. We know about Gavin Williamson's staff party because that was admitted by the Department for Education. Apparently, there was a festive number 10 quiz that was at an unknown date in December. On the 27th, there was apparently sort of leaving do for Cleo Watson. And apparently the Prime Minister went and he spoke at that gathering, and people now trying to work out if that was a party or just a gathering. And then apparently there was also a flat party on the 13th of November. I mean, it's now not just one. The Downing Street party is obviously dominating, but anything could come out about any of those gatherings, and it just would not look very good.
It would not look very good. And there are so many gatherings, I'm actually surprised that neither of us was invited to any of them. But this is not Trader Chat. This is not Trader Chat. Flynn-Gower and I usually go through this on Monday, but you have a hell of a lot of market moves. And if the little baby thinks that it's great being in this world when you're the daughter of the Prime Minister, it might not be for too long.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that I'll keep the newspapers from the day she was born. Anyhow, market movers, going to try and do my best Flynn-Gower here. So we are 14-1 now that Boris Johnson leaves office this year. I did rule this out last week. I still think there's not quite enough time. We were 28s. We then cut it to 16s. We took money at 16s. We're now 14s. That 14s could feel pressure. I wouldn't be surprised if that got shorter, despite the fact that we're inching closer and closer towards the end of the year. We are 13-8. The Prime Minister leaves in 2022. That has been a bigger price recently. I think it was 7-4 just about last week, now 13-8. We are 4-6 that Boris Johnson, the Conservative leader at the next election, just 6-5 that he's not. Just to go over North Shropshire again, because it really is quite the journey. I mean, firstly, we were actually 50-1 Labour on North Shropshire from 66s. We actually pushed out Labour, even though there was a talk that they'd had some impressive internal polling. Not the same polling as the Lib Dems internally, but there are two parties now which are claiming to be within hailing distance of the Tories. One of them is very, very wrong, potentially. And regarding the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, we went to evens for Lib Dems, 8-them for the Tories. That was from 8-15 and 6-4, respectively. 8-15 Tories, 6-4 Lib Dems, who had already been cut from 7-4. Now we are 4-5 for the Liberal Democrats, evens for the Tories. Again, big moves, and I think we could see further flip-flopping depending on what happens. But the Lib Dems are now favourites and still a popular option with punters, even those who have missed several early votes.
Yeah, and the candidate in North Shropshire, who apologised after liking Priti Patel to Hitler's propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels. She wouldn't be the first to have done that. But Helen Morgan, she has a good smile. Will people be smiling if they back her? Will she win? She's gone into odds on, and it's quite an incredible move. Is it even value at 5-6?
I wouldn't be backing. No, I wouldn't say get involved at 5-6 just yet.
Okay.
I mean, I personally must admit I'd thought 7-4 was a bit short. I have reasons for this, which is basically just that North Shropshire is much less favourable territory for anti-Tory parties, and particularly Lib Dems, than Cheshire and Amersham was. Everybody will look to that. But in Cheshire and Amersham, the Remain vote was much higher. The demographics, I think, were better.
It's the Patterson debacle as well, though, William. All the seeds are in place for an upset here, surely.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you know, so much has changed from last week. I just don't necessarily know now whether I'd be wanting to steam in, say, before the weekend, when you might have another internal poll, whatever. Because if what Labour is saying is true, I'm not inclined to believe them. But if what they're saying is now true, then they're within hailing distance of the Tories and the Lib Dems are just taking votes away. And if it's vice versa, then the Lib Dems are taking votes away from Labour. I'd have to say, you know, you might be backing Lib Dems at 5-6 with the hope of cashing in an anti-Tory sentiment. Are you absolutely sure you know where it's going? You know, I'm more inclined to be for the Lib Dems have had the bigger on the ground presence and that they've got the better shot. But is there a possibility that disaffected Tory voters end up just not voting for any party or going to the other two parties and leaving them cutting each other's throats for the Tories to stay on? I mean, just things like that are stuff, are sort of factors I consider.
Okay, yeah. Well, we will have a polling station before the by-election next week. But lastly on this, it's certain that a lot of Tory voters will just simply not turn up. They won't have it in their stomach after what's happened to say Christmas is coming up. By the way, this time last Christmas, yada yada. I can't vote for the Tories anymore. Yeah,
I think that's entirely possible. It's also having an effect in polling. Plenty are moving to the don't know column. As an example, Labour had a 4-point lead with opinion for a poll, or actually, sorry, Redfield and Wilton, I believe, for a stat poll done this week. I think that Labour were taking just 10% of the Tory vote at the 2019 general election based on those tables. Again, this is all crucial long term, because if Boris Johnson doesn't make it to the next election, the incoming Tory leader is going to have better favourables than him at that point, and it could be considered a big reset. on that note, Sunak is still our favourite, but Truss is not far behind. And I think those are all factors to consider. Again, not writing off chance of an upset. They're clearly there. The seat is clearly up for grabs, especially given that, the get out the vote operation is going to be taking place. But just make sure you're happy with all the essential facts before going in, especially now at 5 to 6.
Your ideas for the title of the podcast today were Party Central, Blessed are the Leakers, and Party's Over. The party is certainly over. The party might be beginning for Labour, though. Obviously, all of this is good for the main opposition party. Keir Starmer doesn't seem to have been in the news a hell of a lot lately because Boris has hogged the limelight. But so if you are taking a pro-Labour view going into 2022, you're in a good place.
Yeah, I think you would be happy with everything that's going on. From a political betting point of view, the one thing you might worry about is if you back Labour for the next general election, or Starmer to be the next PM, are you now becoming a bit reliant on Johnson getting there for your best chance? Is he your best motivator, not only for people to stay away from the Conservatives, but also for people in Scotland to vote for the SNP, thus making sure they don't get any of those seats, and driving actually the anti-Tory sentiment too in Wales, where they did quite well in 2019. Are you really wanting Johnson to go, which is a reason some are saying Keir Starmer hasn't called for his resignation. That's just a long-term thing to be wary of. But that said, it's at the moment all pretty good for Labour in the sense that the government is just dominating due to any amount of bad news stories. Starmer is 7-2 to be the next Prime Minister. I think that price is fair and about right. It will look generous on some days, less generous so on others.
I think that'll be under pressure as well. So before we finish up, Keir Starmer is in a weird position in that he's obviously reveling and delighting in Boris's struggles, but kind of needs him to be there as well for his best electoral chances himself.
Yeah, very much so. There are structural issues for the Tories going in the longer term, but I don't see anybody motivating opposition quite like Johnson, who is also just inherently linked now to all of these, I don't even know what to describe them, to the Omni scandals, that we've seen.
Scandals, I like that.
Yeah, so there we go. But in terms of where Labour are, we're finding that they're the slight beneficiary of anger at the government, but it's more passive, and that they aren't moving as such. They're gaining small amounts of percentages, but big Tory drops are meaning that they've got the traditional midterm polling. These stories at some point do tend to get forgotten. We remember Owen Paterson, but if you ask the man in the street now, would he be the first thing on their mind? No.
Yeah.
But it does just lay a foundation, and the Tories do have lots of governing challenges. So Labour looking better, things looking better on that side, I think, for Starmer and his crew.
Okay, anything else before we finish up? And I do reiterate, we'll be back next week before what promises to me to be a really fascinating pre-Christmas by-election. What else we got, William?
It's mainly all things focused on the by-election. In France, we've had a sort of thinning of the herd regarding the presidential election. A couple of big beasts have actually just been knocked out, including Michel Barnier, in sort of the internal votes to be the candidate. Macron will still be favoured when that market is back up and readjusted. But that's really heating up, and we're not even into the calendar year of the election just yet. Also, we did discuss Scottish independence referendum polling. We're still
evens at 8 to 11 at the moment.
Yeah, evens and 8 to 11, evens for no. Evens for yes, 8 to 7 for no. Bottle on that it doesn't take place before 2025, which looking pretty attractive considering all of the various challenges on the SNP's plate going forward. And in terms of just looking for the other odds, Rishi Sunak is 5-2 to be the next Prime Minister. Liz Truss 9-2. Reason I bring that up is just because if there's so much anger with Boris, and if we are on the verge of some sort of leadership contest, it's going to come up pretty quickly, one would have thought. So it could be that we're doing one in January or so next year. Sunak starting favourite, Truss not far behind. And last but not least, you can get 6-4 Tory majority at the next election. That's out from 11-8. I remember the sort of days where that was just solidly odds on each week.
Yeah.
It's now drifting. Could that be an angle people begin to play long term? Do they think Sunak or Truss or even a Gove takes the Tories to the next general election and think that works better for them and better for their market prospects? I think it's entirely possible.
Pardon my analogy, and I'm all for babies. I love babies, but I think the baby's dad is a bit of a dead man walking. William, that was good fun today. We'll be back next week, obviously.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it. And yes, see you after the Triftis party that definitely won't be taking place.
And that was the polling station with Johnny Ward. No Nigel Farage, no Ben Keith, but William Kedjanyi. We'll talk to you next week.